Hi, I'm Rich Galloway. I'm going to take a few minutes to tell you about the underscore internal index of Splunk. First, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I've been a Splunk user since 2012, a member of the Splunk Trust since 2016, and I've been providing Splunk professional services for a little over a year now. Let's talk a little bit about what underscore internal is. This is the index used for many of Splunk's own logs, hence the internal name. By default, only admins are allowed to view this index, but that is a property that can be assigned to any user. We'll assume that your user has access to these logs. One nice thing about underscore internal is that it doesn't count towards your quota. So you don't have to worry about how much you're ingesting in this index. It's all free to you. So what's inside internal? It's most of what you see in the Splunk logs directory if you have access to the file system. For example, Splunk D, Splunk D UI access and web access. There's the license usage log, as well as a scheduler and several other logs. Just about anything that goes to Splunk home / var log Splunk is in underscore internal, with a couple exceptions. Things that aren't in internal are, for example, the audit trail. That's in its own index called underscore audit. Resource usage is in underscore introspection index. The KV store is also part of introspection. Also the HTTP event collector, or HEC, dist objects log, and the license usage summary log, not to be confused with the license usage log. Those are all in underscore introspection. But we're going to focus today strictly on underscore internal. A lot of things you can find out from underscore internal are in other places in the Splunk UI, for example, the monitoring console. But sometimes the way it's presented in the UI may not be exactly what you want to see. So it's good to know, how can you get this information yourself? One thing you may want to find out is, when did my Splunk UI start? Somebody may wonder why scheduled searches didn't run overnight. Well, maybe it's because Splunk was down for some reason. And you can go to the underscore internal log to find out, when did Splunk restart? And it's a question of looking at your host and looking for anything that's not a forwarder. And you'll find out, for example, that the Splunk started at 8 o'clock in the morning. So if something was supposed to happen at 7:30, maybe it was a clue that it didn't run because Splunk was down for some reason. Speaking of saved searches, it's very common to want to know, when was the last time my saved search ran? Again, we can go to internal to find out about that. If you look for a saved search name, and in this example, of course, we're looking for all saved searches, but in your usage, you'll want to look for a specific search name. Look for successes, so you'll know that the search completed, and then we can pull out the last time it ran, as well as how long it took to run, and you'll get a list. In this case, I kept the star in, but you could replace the asterisk with any of these saved search names, and you'll find out exactly when it ran. A lot of folks want to know about their forwarders. What forwarders do they have? Especially if you've inherited a system recently, or maybe you're filling in for your regular admin. You want to know, okay, how many forwarders do I have? What kind of forwarders do I have? I find the easiest way to do that is to go to internal and get a list of all the TCP/IP connections. Use your stats command to dedupe the results. You can also pull out what version of the forwarder it is and what platform it's running on. And a very good thing to find out, as we see from the forward type attribute, you can tell if you're running a heavy forwarder which Splunk calls a full forwarder, or a UF, which is a universal forwarder. And the distinction, of course, being the full forwarder is capable of much more than a universal forwarder is. And speaking of forwarders, one thing you'll probably want to find out is when was the last time a forwarder phoned home. And by phone home, we mean it connected to the deployment server, said, "Here I am, do you have anything for me?" A forwarder that doesn't phone home at a regular interval is not going to get updates from the deployment server. So if you push out an app and find you're not getting the data you thought you were going to get, it could be that your forwarder hasn't phoned home in time, hasn't picked up the new app yet. And that's a very simple query. Look for component equals DC:*, and you'll see the phone home, in this case, is going to retry later because it couldn't connect. So here you find out this is why the app is not reporting data. It's because it hasn't been deployed to the forwarder yet. A common question admins will ask is, how much data am I indexing? The monitoring console will tell you a lot about that. It'll even give you an alert when you're using up your limit. But sometimes you want to know about more specific information, an individual index, an individual source type, combination of the two, for example. Easier to do in SPL than in a GUI. So in this query, we're looking at the metrics source. The group is per index throughput. That's data that's being pushed through the indexers. The series keyword is essentially the index you're writing to. And we could add source type if we wanted to. The remainder of this query is converting bytes that are stored in the log into gigabytes to make it easier to display on the visuals. And then we put that into a time chart. So now we can see over the period of time, this is roughly 8 hours, how much have we indexed? So we can see peaks and valleys over the course of a day or so. Search concurrency, that's what you may have, for example, is when multiple searches are running at roughly the same time. That can be a bad thing because searches that run at the same time are competing for resources. And you may find that only one of them is going to win if you don't have enough CPU available. So it's good to find out how many concurrent searches do I have so that I can spread them out across time and have them not competing for resources. To do that, we look at the scheduler source type within _internal. Look at time and compare that to runtime to get how long a search ran, and use the concurrency command to find out how many searches actually ran at about the same time. And that gives us a graph like this where we see quite a few searches are running. Most of the time it's 6 or 7 or so running at about the same time. On a Splunk server running the recommended hardware, that shouldn't be a problem because you'll have at least 12 CPUs and not be competing for resources. But in a busier system, if you saw this running up closer to your number of CPUs, that could be an indication of a potential problem. Another potential problem would be a long-running search. So a long-running search is taking taking up a CPU for a long time, which could also run into concurrency problems and resource contention problems. So again, we look at the scheduler log for all apps and use our stats command to find out how many are running over a particular minimum quota. In this case, we're just going to list them all from longest running to shortest, and we can see one of our Threat Connect apps is running a search that is taking 52,000 seconds, which is a pretty long time. Something that almost a day, and you'd really want to probably look into that and find out why that search is taking a long time, because that means the CPU is tied up for a long time and other searches can't run because of it. We talked a little bit about concurrency in searches earlier. We can also have concurrency in dashboard use. And you may wonder, okay, well, why does that matter? Dashboards that are used a lot at the same time tend to run the same searches at the exact same time, which means you're using that many CPU and memory. To avoid possible competition for resources and to speed up the performance of the dashboard, you might want to optimize those that are used most often first. I want to explain this whole search. It gets pretty lengthy, but we're pulling data out of the Splunk web access log. That's where we find out where people are signing into the GUI and what they're doing. And what we come out with is this graph showing how many concurrent dashboard uses we have. Only 2 are being used more than twice at a time. And the disjointed graph shows that most of the time the dashboards aren't being used at all, or maybe only used once, so they don't appear on this graph because we said we only want to see counts greater than 1. But here we can see that the dashboard 1 is occasionally used by 3 users, which means those are running at least 3 searches at the same time. Maybe we want to look at optimizing that dashboard to use saved searches or post-processing to reduce the number of searches that are going at the same time. Earlier in this video, I talked about someone who's taken over a Splunk instance maybe wants to know how many forwarders they have. Another thing you might want to find out is, of the other Splunk instances I have, what do they do? So we know how to find forwarders. If we look at the server roles component within the internal index, we can see a list of all of the known Splunk instances and what they do, whether they're search heads or whether they're indexers, part of a cluster or not, and so on. This is good information, and it's a good, even for an admin who's been using a system for a while, it's a good idea to run this every now and then just to make sure that nothing's changed, and you find that maybe an indexer is running a front end, so he's also appears as a search head. It could mean that something changed in your configs, and you might want to go back and look at that. Occasionally, you'll have a change, and you want to know how did that change happen. So we kind of mentioned that earlier when we talked about server roles. Occasionally, someone will ask, "My dashboard went away. Why did it happen? When did it happen?" Well, the UI access log can tell you that. If we do a search through that log for the delete method and see who deleted views, well, we get a list now. We see that this particular dashboard was deleted by the admin user 11:30, just before lunch. So now you can go back to the admin and say, "Why did you delete my dashboard?" Going back to license usage, we looked earlier at license usage by index. Here we can see a usage by source type. Different component this time. If we look at, again, we're converting bytes into gigabytes and breaking it down by source type. So ST is the abbreviation used within the internal log for source type. There's also IDX for index, H for host, and S for source. So if you wanted to combine those into different permutations that you may not get out of the UI, you could do so. And here we see our graph showing that these Splunk apps source type is using a lot more indexing than any of the other source types. A lot of people want to know about logins. Okay, when did so-and-so log into the Splunk service? When did he log out? Unfortunately, that information is in underscore audit, which is not the topic of this video. But since we're here, I'll show you that you can go to the underscore audit index, look for the login action, and then you get a list of all the login times for all of your users, including where they logged in from. That's it. I thank you for your attention. Here's my contact information if you have any questions.